Introduction to Soul-Based 3 Lives. Come and read more of my works on the website of EP1-10. Chapter 1. The Pot for Stealing Offerings. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, half of Gu Yiming's collar fell off before him, and he was coiled up and tied around his waist. His feet were covered in muddy cloth shoes with exposed toes, and he stayed in front of a grave. To ask why he was so unlucky, Gu Yiming himself didn't know. On the day he left, he had clearly read the almanac. But he took the wrong mountain road, stepped on a wild fruit, slipped and rolled down the mountain slope, was washed down by the stream for more than 10 miles, and finally reached the shore holding onto the tree roots in the stream. The scholar's robe had also been scratched, and the tangles and dry provisions he carried had already rolled and fallen somewhere. Fortunately, the most important items he had with him were still intact, especially the millennium ginseng plant that was securely tied around his waist. At this moment, Gu Yiming, who was starving, walked along the mountain road for 2 days without encountering any family. He had not eaten anything for 2 days, and the ginseng on his waist was a must-have item entrusted by his owner and could not be used for food. What can be used for eating at present is the things placed in the clay plate in front of me. This is an offering in front of a tomb. There are 3 mantu in the pottery plate. Although it is dry and hard, mantu is still mantu. It's manta that can be eaten. In Gu Yiming's eyes, who is dizzy with hunger, this mantu is no different from the one that has just been cooked. It's okay to steal one, just one, Gu Yiming thought to himself. Suddenly, Gu Yiming clasped his fists and fiercely bowed deeply to the tomb in front of him. Well, Mr. Yang of the Qi family, I didn't check for a while. I got lost here and was hungry. I borrowed 1 mantu for the time being, and I will give it back when I am saved. Then Gu Yiming bowed deeply again, and suddenly remembered what happened when he put his hands together and bowed deeply to the end. If the master allows me to borrow manta temporarily, please don't get up. Thank you very much. Gu Yiming shivers while bowing, glancing at the grave. I saw a few yellow sheets of paper being pressed down by a large stone, suddenly making a loud noise in the cold wind. Gu Yiming was startled. I will borrow one and go right away. He quickly reached out and took the top one of the 3 mantu in front of the tombstone, bowed deeply again, and then flew away without lifting his head. I ran with my head covered for a while, feeling the wind getting stronger and stronger. Gu Yiming was so hungry that his feet were floating and his eyes were dazed. He stumbled and fell under a black pine tree, his forehead was scratched, and mantu rolled down the slope. Ah! Gu Yiming was shocked. It was not easy to borrow mantu from a dead person. You can't lose it. So he crawled and chased down the mountain slope. Fortunately, the mantu rolled near a stream and was blocked by a stone. Gu Yiming rushed to grab it and held it in his arms. Ignoring that it was covered with silt, he quickly put a bite into his mouth. Just after biting, his mouth was full of crumbs, and he was about to chew when suddenly a thunder exploded in the sky, making Gu Yiming tremble and spit out half a mouthful of mantu. At some point, the sky was already shrouded in dark clouds, thunder rumbled, and it seemed like a heavy rain. Ah! God bless, God bless. Gu Yiming quickly knelt down and bowed several times to the sky, feeling remorseful. He must have stolen offerings and done something wrong, which made heaven and earth angry. Now, Lei Gong has come to strike him. Just after bowing a few times, there was suddenly a commotion behind him. Gu Yiming quickly turned his head and saw more than 20 burly men emerging from the forest behind him, each with a fierce and evil spirit, holding sharp blades of varying lengths, shouting and rushing towards him. Gu Yiming was so scared that he jumped up and ran towards the other side of the stream with a thumping and jumping motion. The big men behind closely followed and shouted, "Come here and suffer death." Gu Yiming was almost frightened to cry, and shouted. I didn't steal it, but I borrowed it. It's just a mantu. Unfortunately, there was still half a mouthful of mantu in his mouth, so he couldn't say clearly. Gu Yiming had just run to the other side of the creek when suddenly more than 20 burly men appeared on the other side, equally fierce and ferocious, with fierce eyes and sharp blades in their hands. The same strange cry rushed towards Gu Yiming, waving the weapon in his hand. "Oh, no, just for a cold mantu, do you want to kill it all?" Gu Yiming was almost scared to wet his pants. At this time, looking back, those behind him also catch up with him. Gu Yiming can only thrust mantu into his mouth, and then squat down to hug his head. Gu Yiming wailed in his heart. "It's just a mantu." As for. Then he waited for the blade to heal. As a result, the big men chasing after them and a group of people who had just emerged from the opposite bank started fighting by the creek. "Kill! Kill you!" Various weapons collided, and screams came from above. Gu Yiming was splashed with blood when two groups of people were fighting. Even the mantu was stained with blood. I don't know which elder brother was so frightened that his hands clasped his head, his eyes closed, and he shouted. After a moment, the thunder grew louder and louder, followed by heavy rain. After two groups of people fought and killed each other, the creek was covered with limbs and bodies, and a large area of blood stained red along the creek. The heavy rain hit the creek, and the blood droplets inside kept jumping, as if reminding Gu Yiming of the brutality of the fight just now. Gu Yiming was scared to pee, but because he was crouching in the stream, his urine mixed with blood was washed away by the stream until it rained heavily and there was no other sound around except for the sound of rain. Gu Yiming then looked around from his fingertips and stood up trembling. I don't know when the mantu fell out of his mouth, so he left half of it in his mouth and never swallowed it. Gu Yiming's lips trembled, his face turned blue, his whole body was wet as if falling into an ice cellar, and he walked to the shore trembling. His throat moved. Gu Yiming swallowed the mantu in his mouth with blood and water. Looking at the corpses around him, he felt like he was in hell, and cried out. Black lightning coiled in the sky like a venomous snake's message, and the rain grew heavier and heavier. The package in Gu Yiming's arms was also lost somewhere, and it was pitch black and difficult to see clearly. Gu Yiming struggled to move his feet towards the shore, just as he was holding onto a big tree and looking for a book garden www.zhaoshuyuan.com to catch his breath, he suddenly heard a deep rumbling sound coming from the upstream of the stream. With the light of lightning, Gu Yiming vaguely saw the direction coming from the rumbling sound, as if a dark wall-like thing was pushing down the stream. Mudslide. Gu Yiming struggled desperately to climb the dirt slope on the bank of the creek, feeling particularly slippery with the mud mixed with rainwater. With clumsy hands and feet, Gu Yiming finally reached a small tree. Before he could show a smile on his face, he brought the tree back into the creek. The creek was already very polluted, and as the mudslide was about to come down, Gu Yiming desperately pulled and seemed to have caught something. When he pulled it over, he saw the body of a big man who had just died in a fight in the creek. His eyes were wide open, and his face was cut open from the middle, which was very frightening. Gu Yiming was so scared that his scalp tingled. He let out a scream and continued to climb up a relatively thick tree on the shore, holding on to the trunk. He turned around and watched the fierce face of the deceased man slowly sink into the mud along the mudslide. Suddenly, a strong sense of vomiting surged up. Gu Yiming vomited violently. After he had just swallowed a mouthful of mantu, he had no food to vomit. He only vomited a stomach of sour water, which made his throat burning. Gu Yiming wiped away the mud and blood on his face, examined his body, and found that there were only some scratches and some sprains in his feet, which were not serious. He then cried silently into the sky. He is just a lost passerby, why did he suffer this calamity? The cold rain poured into Gu Yiming's throat, making him slightly sober. After finally gaining some strength, he began to struggle to climb higher. At this point, the rain had decreased slightly, but the sky was almost completely dark. Gu Yiming had to rely on his senses to make his way, slipping and falling countless times along the way. Chapter 2. The Dilapidated Mountain Temple. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, 10 miles away, outside the dilapidated mountain god temple, a group of 7 or 8 ferocious-looking men with injured faces, covering their wounds and cursing, walked forward in the rain. Today I finally killed Lu Laosan. He had a big horse and monkey face, which made me feel nauseous from the first day I saw him. Today, I cut open his stomach with a knife. You guys, did you see that? His expression was really amazing. A bearded man laughed and cursed. The white-bellied intestines rolled out, and he had an incredulous expression on his face. He wanted to push it back in, ha ha ha. A thin black man next to him covered the wound on his forehead and joined in. Ha ha ha, his stomach was full of miscellaneous things, and surprisingly it was also white. I thought he was full of bad water, and when he took it out, it should be black. The bearded man was proud. And there's also Wu Laoyo's head, which was smashed open with a hammer like a watermelon, it's so damn crisp. A big man with a square face beside him also shouted along. That's right, it's really fragile. After exploding, Wu Laolu surprisingly shook back and didn't fall down immediately. He was such a tough beast. Speaking of which, Xia Laosan in our gang also had his head in the bud. I don't know if his wife will not recognize him when she comes back to collect his body. The thin and black man began to speak in a lewd tone. His wife's white body is really tempting. A short and chubby man with moles on his face chuckled. He has a hard life, and our guy is not weak either. Ha ha ha, I promise he can make his wife want to be immortal and die, ha ha ha. A few big men couldn't help but glance at their pants crotch, thinking of the delicate appearance of the Xia Laosan family lady, and suddenly burst into laughter without hesitation. Speaking of which, it was really enjoyable to defeat most of the skilled members of the Crouching Tiger gang in one battle. After that, their territory and women were enough for us to share well. The bearded man took out a wine gourd from his waist, tilted his neck and took a few sips, then threw the gourd to his brother next to him. Boss, you must be brave and lead your brothers to fight in order to achieve a complete victory. The few people next to you took a few sips each, flattering and complimenting the bearded man while drinking. Everyone has a share. I will enjoy Xia Laosan's wife for 3 days first, and after 3 days, the brothers will take turns coming. Okay, boss is mighty. Harmony echoed in the surrounding area. The group continued on, but suddenly the thin and black man who was walking at the front paused and pointed to a firelight on the nearby hillside for everyone to see. Isn't that the direction of Tongzipo? It should be a deserted temple on a broken mountain over there. How could there be flames? And, do you listen? It seems like there's a woman's voice. The chubby man's ears suddenly twitched. Women. Several people suddenly came to their senses. This group of people were originally outlaws. Today, they won the battle with other gangs and were in high spirits. They had originally planned to go back to the town restaurant to have a good drink, and then each of them hugged a woman to have a good night. Suddenly, in the wilderness, the voice of a woman came from more than one young woman. Isn't this just bringing them to their door? So these 7 big men coincidentally wore lewd smiles on their faces and began to quietly touch the mountain temple with faint lights in the distance. In the mountain temple, the fire pot in the middle flickers, and on the soft bed spread out next to it, 2 young beauties are snuggling up against each other, one with blue hair and blue palace attire, and the other with purple hair and purple wide-sleeved robes. The clothes are luxurious and the beauty is unparalleled. Excellent posture, flat lower abdomen, slender thighs. Among them, the woman in blue was holding a smoking gun, leaning against the brazier. The flames flickered and licked the ointment filling at the front of the gun. Suddenly, the oil splashed and made a faint noise, and a strong fragrance drifted away. I saw this woman in green, as if kissing her lover's tongue, greedily and seductively sucking on the mouthpiece of her cigarette gun, with strands of fragrant green smoke rushing into her mouth and nose. I saw the woman in green holding her head high, as if savoring the fragrance. Her eyelashes trembled slightly, and it took a while for her energy to recover. "Give me a breath too." The woman in purple next to her smiled coquettishly as she leaned onto the smoking gun, pouting her lips, feeling extremely shy. All of this was being observed by the several big men hiding outside, and their throats suddenly rolled together, as if the wounds on their foreheads and bodies had also forgotten to hurt. "Ah!" The woman in green moved her smoking gun seductively, then bent down and affectionately lifted the woman in purple's cheeks, her eyes facing each other, tender like water. Then the woman in green opened her small mouth gently, breathing like a orchid. A wisp of smoke drifted towards her through her mouth and nose, while the woman in purple breathed in gently. The wisp of smoke was sucked into her body through her mouth and nose. The woman in purple's expression suddenly relaxed, her eyebrows parted, and her face was filled with pleasure and intoxication. This scene made several big men outside feel blood pumping. The short and fat man with moles and the thin and black man were about to jump out of the grass and were held down by the bearded big man. Years of licking blood on the edge of the blade have given this great thief an extra sense of danger compared to ordinary people, although this last glimmer of clarity is gradually disappearing. "Sister, they still don't want to come in." The woman in purple leaned against the shoulder of the woman in blue, gently stroking her earlobe with her fingers, murmuring. She raised her white wrist, causing the clothes at the collar to slide off a large part, revealing a large area of snow-white skin. It was evident that her figure was exquisite and elegant, hidden under the wide robe. Zhaoshuyuan.com, "Sister, don't worry, it's cold and wet outside. I see how long those stinky men can hold on." The woman in green slowly put down her cigarette gun and picked up a small emerald green wine jug from a nearby jade plate. She first lifted the lid of the jug, and her small Cheong nose twitched, as if she was smelling the aroma of the wine. "It's okay to wait, the fire is strong enough to vent the anger." The woman in purple smiled and lay in the arms of the woman in blue, tilting her neck and opening her cherry lips. The woman in blue gently lifted her wrist and slightly tilted the wine jug in her hand. The fine wine from the spout flowed into the mouth of the woman in purple below, with a charming and enchanting posture. The woman in green seemed to deliberately make the wine jug tremble, causing the wine to tilt and pour onto the woman in purple's chest. The woman in purple's robe seemed to be made of silk, instantly soaking close to her body, highlighting the fullness of her chest. The woman in green rolled over with a sigh, her legs lightly rubbing against each other between her skirts, faintly visible. At this moment, the 7 big men outside the door could no longer resist, their faces red and ears red, their eyes bloodshot with desire. Under the guidance of the bearded big man, they began to charge towards the broken mountain temple with a strange cry. "Oh, there's a man, there's a weapon." The 2 women seemed frightened and coquettishly dodged. Several big men quickly threw down their sharp blades and chased after them. The 2 women just smiled coquettishly and dodged towards the back hall of the mountain god temple, while the 7 big men followed closely and their saliva was almost flowing. But none of these 7 big men noticed that just as they entered the back hall, the originally open door of the mountain god temple suddenly closed without any wind, and the brazier, soft couch, and wine pot on the ground disappeared in an instant. The flames also disappeared, and the entire dilapidated mountain god temple suddenly became cold, desolate, dirty, and dusty, as if no one had been here for a long time. Chapter 3. The Transformation of the Broken Temple. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, huh? It's strange, I just saw some flames. Gu Yiming wiped the water stains on his face in surprise. Now the rain has decreased a lot, and the thunder has long stopped. Gu Yiming couldn't distinguish the direction in the dark night. Just now, he vaguely saw a firelight in the far distance. As a result, he went down the mountain slope and then up the mountain slope, and the firelight disappeared. Now, he had no direction at all. Gu Yiming had already exhausted himself and walked forward step by step. He had originally thought that there might be hunters from nearby villages who could beg for food, at least drink hot water, and take shelter from the rain. Now, he had completely returned to a lost state and could only guess the general direction to continue moving forward. As he was walking, there was suddenly a steady and heavy footsteps coming from behind. Gu Yiming was startled, afraid that the bandits he had just encountered by the creek might be chasing him again. However, his standing position was bare and there was not even a cover around him. He had to squat to the side and use his long dirty scholar robe to cover his face, hoping that the visitors would not see him. Invisible, invisible. Gu Yiming silently recited in his heart, but his tall and heavy footsteps seemed to turn back just a few steps away. Ah! Gu Yiming could see from the corner of his clothes a tall figure with a dark face, dressed in a raincoat and a bamboo hat, appearing in front of him. He was immediately startled and was about to run, but his neck was grabbed by someone coming. "Don't kill me, I didn't do anything, I didn't see anything." Gu Yiming kicked his feet like a lifted rabbit, but the tall man was 2 heads taller than him, and Gu Yiming had no hope of breaking free. "What to kill? It's strange how you talk. I'm just asking you, who are you?" The tall man with a bamboo hat sounded like a bell, his gaze embarrassed. Who am I and what does it have to do with you?" said the sage. "Shouldn't you first give your name before asking someone else's name?" Gu Yiming remained silent, but suddenly, he didn't know where the courage came from. He stopped struggling and stared at the person with a stiff neck. "Scholar." The tall man looked up and down at Gu Yiming, nodded with a smile on his face, and put him down. Fu Donglai asked for your advice on the young master's name. Then he slightly bowed to show his salute, even in a lighter tone. This polite gesture actually surprised Gu Yiming. He quickly took a few more steps back, only to slip and almost fall into the ditch. Fu Donglai grabbed his belt and pulled it back. "Xiao Xing Gu Yiming. What's up, Daxiao?" Gu Yiming stood up hurriedly and suddenly noticed a dark long sword with a scabbard around his waist. His whole body trembled, and his heart lifted again. He thought to himself, "It's broken. Seeing that this person still knows etiquette, I thought he was a reasonable person, but he carries a sharp blade and walks at night. Is it really related to the 2 groups who just got into a fire? I wouldn't be so unlucky, right? Great Xia, forget it, Fu Donglai can't bear it. Why did Lord Gu travel alone at night here? Have you ever seen anything strange on the way?" Fu Donglai's eyes were burning as he glanced around at the various abrasions and stains on Gu Yiming's body, even pausing for a moment on his shoes with his toes exposed. "Xiao Sheng. I came here to visit relatives and friends, missed the lodging, so I rushed overnight." Gu Yiming evaded in his tone, not wanting to reveal himself to strangers. Besides, what is a strange thing? Does it mean that 2 groups of people suddenly cut each other off by the creek? Don't get involved in the grudges and grievances inside yourself. That's good. The strong man looked at Gu Yiming with a smile on his face. Suddenly, he reached out and patted his shoulders on both sides, then turned around and walking briskly and disappearing into the night. "Hey, Daxia. Daxia Fu." Gu Yiming suddenly remembered something, but shouted a few times. The branches swayed in the night, but there was no response. Zhaoshuyuan.com. Gu Yiming looked bitter, originally intending to ask for directions and also beg for some dry food to fill his stomach, but now it seems that there is no point. The poor scholar turned his head to look in the direction of the faint light he had just seen, touched his groaning stomach, and decided to continue moving forward. The people over there should have just fallen asleep, so he hurried over and borrowed some food and lodging, which was not too impolite. At this moment, the secret room in the back hall of the mountain god temple was filled with spring light, and the big men were soaked and limp on the ground, gasping for breath, enjoying the lingering charm. Only the bearded big man was still entangled with the woman in purple clothes, but it was already the end of the crossbow. How about it? I'm pretty good, my brothers, how can they compare to me? The tone of the bearded man was weak with a hint of self-satisfaction. That's true. Big brother's young energy is strong, and I can't bear it anymore. The woman in purple smiled coquettishly, but a strange green light flashed in her seductive eyes. Little slut, are you saying that I am the most powerful man you have ever met? The bearded man smirked and kneaded the buttocks of the woman in purple. That's for sure. The woman in purple quietly leaned over to the big man's ear and blew, making him itch and feel very comfortable. It took me 5 or 6 times to fully release the vigorous yang energy, otherwise I wouldn't be able to speak. The girl in purple's lips were getting closer and closer to the big man's ear, gently touching the earlobe and tearing it apart, her tone becoming lighter and lighter. The big man was full of pride on his face. Just as he was about to say something more, he suddenly felt something soft and cold piercing his eardrums, penetrating his brain. He immediately grabbed onto the shoulders of the woman in purple with both hands, instinctively wanting to push them away, but it was too late. The bearded man's eyes turned white and he lost consciousness. His body involuntarily began to twitch, rolling with the girl in purple. Chapter 4. The Danger of Breaking the Temple. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, the thin and black man next to him heard the commotion and struggled to open his eyelids. Seeing the big man constantly twitching, he thought the big man had regained his strength. He chuckled and tilted his head, saying, "Hupangzi, you see big brother, he hasn't rested yet. He's on the stage again. His stamina is really amazing." Suddenly, I noticed that the chubby guy next to me had tilted his face to the other side at some point without any reaction. I pursed my lips and muttered, "This chubby guy slept early." Just as I was about to reach out and pull the chubby guy, a charming face suddenly leaned in front of me, a woman in blue. The woman in green clothes half untied her clothes and looked affectionately at the thin black man, blocking his view. The thin and black man walked through the gaps in the woman's scattered hair, seeming to feel something was wrong with the twitching bearded man on the other side. The rhythm of the twitching was too fast and the amplitude was too small, and before he could react, the woman in blue had already leaned towards her forehead and kissed her. The thin and black man twisted his face forcefully to the other side, suddenly realizing that the other brothers had just been lying on the side panting heavily. Now it seemed that there was no movement, not even any movement in their bodies. After a man's desires are released, there will always be a period of time when he becomes rational. Thinking of what happened just now, an inexplicable fear suddenly hits his heart. The strength from somewhere suddenly stands up and runs towards the entrance with a frightened expression on his face. Suddenly, something caught my legs and I lowered my head to see that I was entangled in the hair of a woman in green and dragged back. This thick black hair was like a living creature, and even some strands of hair pierced the skin and entered the flesh and blood of the man's legs. The thin and black man let out a scream and was dragged back to the center of the room, then his thicker black hair wrapped around him. "Hey, sister, how did you scare him? His flesh and blood are sour, and the old ghost king wouldn't like it." The purple-clad girl sitting next to the bearded man was already sitting on the side, her mouth full of blood, gently tidying up her clothes with her hands, her slender tongue licking at the corner of her mouth. The face of the woman in green suddenly appeared from her thick hair, pale, with blood at the corners of her eyes. Her hair continued to wriggle, as if sucking on the blood of the man on the ground. The woman in green suddenly withdrew her long hair and smiled coquettishly, "Sister, could you occasionally adjust your taste? Otherwise, you would be invaded by those stinky men all day here, and let them enjoy themselves to death. It's really too cheap for them. Sister still knows how to play, hee hee." The woman in purple chuckled coquettishly, and suddenly her expression froze for a moment. Then she said, "All right, the big deal is done. Let's send them to see the Ghost King. The Ghost King has been waiting a bit impatient and just urged us." The woman in blue smiled and nodded, lightly stroking her sleeves. The giant rock behind the secret room made a sound, revealing a passage. Below the passage, there was a faint sound of water, seemingly an underground river. The clothes on the woman in purple suddenly came to life, dragging the bodies of 7 big men who had already lost all their breath into the passage. The sound of thumping was incessant, and they were all thrown into the dark river. Then, the giant stone at the entrance of the passage returned to its original position, and there was no visible change. The woman in purple yawned lazily and said, "Sister, I'm tired and I need to go back to refine blood and food." Suddenly, she tilted her head and furrowed her brows lightly. "Why are there strangers coming in the middle of the night? Is it a dessert brought to her door?" The woman in green also showed a slight smile and said, "The one who came is still a young man. It seems that she will be busy for a while tonight." The woman in purple had a gloomy expression and said, "Sister, are you going or should I go? This man's footsteps are sluggish, so he should be easy to seduce. If you're feeling weak, you need to let him vent his yuan-yang before you can use it. Why don't you put in more effort today, and if you have any surprises next time, give them to your sister." The woman in green waved lightly, and a gust of wind swept through her, instantly cleaning up the surrounding environment. The woman in green was also dressed neatly, and the bloodstains at the corners of her eyes disappeared. "Then let me give it to my sister." The woman in purple yawned again, and suddenly her figure moved. The figure of her purple clothes floated up and out from a very hidden air window above the secret room, but the speed was not slow. The air window was very small, and even the larger cat might not be able to get out, but the woman managed to get out without any obstacles and flew far away with a whoosh. The woman in green looked around and saw no flaws. Her body moved and turned into a cloud of green smoke, disappearing in place. "Excuse me. Is anyone there?" After a moment, the voice of a young man came from outside the dilapidated Shanshan temple. It was Gu Yiming who was exploring at the door, looking for the book garden www.zhaozhuiyuan.com. At this time, the rain had completely stopped, and there was a faint moonlight. Under the moonlight, the dilapidated Shanshan temple looked like a pagoda covered in scales, imposing. This mountain temple has a relatively large size, with a low-walled front yard and dilapidated side halls on both sides. In the middle is the main hall, and behind the main hall, it is too dark to see clearly. There should also be a backyard. Seeing no response, Gu Yiming furrowed his brows into a knot. Just now, under the moonlight, he saw footprints at the entrance of the mountain god temple. It seemed that there was more than one person, and he was a bit worried that he might collide with those bandits who had merged. After all, this place is only 3 or 4 miles away from the creek where the accident occurred. Is it those bandits lurking inside, turning off the lights and waiting to ambush themselves? Gu Yiming felt that this idea was somewhat ridiculous. He had no strength to restrain himself, and a group of powerful men were using this thought to ambush him. Is it necessary? Besides, I have no grudges against these people, Taking a mantu in front of the grave should not count. Since the stream hasn't caused any trouble for oneself, there shouldn't be any need for it now. Gu Yiming was soaked all over and felt very uncomfortable. He urgently needed a place to take off his clothes and dry them. So he mustered up the courage, explored his head, and knocked on the open front door with his hand. Seemingly unresponsive, Gu Yiming bit his lips and then increased his strength to tap. "Haven't you heard me yet?" Just as he was about to knock again, the front door panel flipped over and made a loud noise. The entire door panel seemed to have rotted and fell in half, which startled Gu Yiming. "Okay, at least you can hear it now." Gu Yiming still felt a bit uneasy in his heart. After waiting for a moment, he saw that there was still no movement inside, so he cautiously entered the front door of the mountain god temple. He had no idea that as soon as he entered, he was like half stepping into the gates of hell. Chapter 5. The Scenery of the Entrance. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, Gu Yiming took advantage of the faint moonlight and walked through the narrow front hall filled with debris, feeling his way to the main hall. There are 3 blurry statues in the left center of the main hall. Gu Yiming groped into the main hall and seemed to stumble on something, almost falling. Gu Yiming reached out and touched it, as if it was an axe. He thought to himself, is it the axe left here by a hunter who went up the mountain to gather firewood nearby? In order to strengthen his courage, Gu Yiming firmly held the axe in his hand and groped towards the altar with the other hand. Although it seems that no one has come to this dilapidated mountain temple after entering just now, it may not be that no one has come to offer offerings to the mountain god. What if there are any edible offerings? Recalling the mantis stolen from the tomb during the day, Gu Yiming feels that he doesn't seem to resist the guilt brought about by the stolen offerings since he has had the first time to do it again. Touching back and forth, I only touched the dust in one hand, as if I had touched a clay oil lamp with some lamp oil inside. Gu Yiming felt a sense of joy in his heart and quickly touched the fire folder in his arms. He found that the fire folder had been lost for a long time, and only the Millennium Ginseng sealed with oil paper and hidden by himself was still there. Looking down at the axe in his hand, Gu Yiming suddenly became excited. Although he didn't have a torch, he found a stone and tried to knock out sparks to light this half-oil lamp. However, no matter how Gu Yiming struck the stone he casually found, there were occasional flashes of light, but he could not generate a stable spark to light the oil lamp. After a thumping sound, Gu Yiming, who was cold and hungry, felt weak all over, especially the wet clothes sticking to his body. He began to take off his shirt, wring water hard, and then spread it out on a slightly flat wooden table. Gradually drying in the shade was better than getting close to him. The cold air entering his body could not avoid a serious illness. Gu Yiming was hesitating whether to take off his pants as well when he suddenly felt it was indecent to take off his clothes in front of the mountain god statue. He turned around and bowed a few times to the blurry mountain god statue. Blessed by the mountain god, Shaoxing got lost in the rainy night and took a night's rest in the precious land. If there was any disrespect, please forgive me. Gu Yiming bowed again with his bare upper body, and then found a cattail, intending to make do with the night. Since there is a mountain god temple, you can always find someone along the path. Just as Gu Yiming was curled up on a tattered futon, drowsy, he suddenly heard a woman exclaiming outside. "Hurry up, help me! Help me! Ah!" Someone shouting for help. Gu Yiming had a cold war and suddenly regained some clarity. Still a woman. It's broken. Did the group of bandits who were fighting during the day bully a good woman from a nearby family, and the woman escaped here? What should we do then? Gu Yiming touched the axe next to him and immediately gave himself courage, thinking to himself, although I am also in a difficult situation to protect myself, I cannot see the criminals committing crimes. This is the mountain god temple, and those criminals must have some consideration for the face of the gods here. So Gu Yiming picked up his axe and jumped outside the main hall, shouting loudly, "Girl, girl! Come over here!" Then he ran to the outside door and began to explore and look around. I saw a woman in green, with disheveled hair and a flustered expression, running towards the mountain temple. Upon entering, she bumped into Gu Yiming with a full embrace. Gu Yiming was afraid of hurting the woman, so at the moment of collision, he threw his axe aside and the two of them rolled into a ball and collapsed at the door. "Girl, girl! Are you okay?" Gu Yiming quickly pushed the woman away as if she had been pricked by a needle. He didn't even dare to look too much, only feeling that the touch just now was extremely soft. His cheeks were feverish, so he quickly held the axe in his hands and looked out to avoid embarrassment. "Me, where am I being chased by a group of criminals?" The woman in green wrapped her arm around Gu Yiming's shoulder like a water snake, murmuring in a tone that completely lacked the urgency of being chased by the criminals. "Evil people. Are they a group of strong men with big arms and round waists?" Gu Yiming was surprised and quickly avoided the woman's obsession while describing the two groups of people he had seen during the day. "That's right, it's like that. There's a man with a big beard and a fierce expression on his face, it really scared me to death. The woman posted it up again and continued, they look like they're going to eat me. Although she said so, the woman in green thought to herself, I'm afraid I ate them, right? Oh, that's not easy to handle. How about we block the door and don't let them in? Gu Yiming was startled when he heard the woman's description of the person's appearance and what he had seen before. He quickly looked around. But outside on a rainy night, with a cool breeze and swaying tree shadows, there was no sign of anyone. All right, let's quickly block the door. Don't let anyone outside come in. The woman in green began to sound a bit tired and thought to herself, this scholar is really honest. So the woman in green temporarily gave up her obsession with Gu Yiming, and the two of them stood up the door panel that had just fallen to the ground in half to block the entrance of the front door. They also found some wooden boards to support it, but it always felt weak. Gu Yiming suddenly saw that there seemed to be some unclear debris piled up in the corner of the yard. He went to look for some objects that could be used to block the door, but when he pulled open the weeds that covered it, he found two damaged thin-skin coffins. Oh, there are dead people. The woman in green suddenly exclaimed in surprise, covering her small mouth before turning around and rushing towards Gu Yiming's arms at Shuyuan www.zhaoshuyuan.com. Gu Yiming did not refuse this time because he was also scared and let out a scream, holding the woman in green. Upon further observation, there seemed to be no movement in the thin-skinned coffin, and it was unclear if anyone had been collected inside. However, since it was parked here, there should be some. After all, many places use abandoned houses as makeshift homes for storing corpses. Gu Yiming lightly patted the shoulder of the woman in blue and comforted her, saying, "Don't be afraid, it's okay." Then he suddenly realized that he was still naked and it was not appropriate to hold the woman. He quickly pushed away his soft and delicate body, which he held in his arms, and turned around to bow to the coffin. "Guilt, excuse me, there's nothing wrong, don't get up," Gu Yiming sweated coldly. The woman in green was originally hugged by Gu Yiming and was thinking, "You're just like this, you're still getting started." However, she was suddenly pushed away and was momentarily stunned, so she deliberately fell to the side. "Oh, it hurts." "Ah." Gu Yiming turned around for a moment and quickly went up to pick up the woman in green. However, he looked at his bare upper body with protruding ribs and quickly grabbed something next to him, putting it on his body. He then grabbed the collar with one hand and pulled the woman in green with the other. The woman in green did not reach out to respond, but instead looked at the corner of the clothes that Gu Yiming was holding in his hand with a hint of surprise. Gu Yiming lowered his head and saw that he had pulled over a tattered linen garment. Wearing hemp and filial piety, hemp clothes are not auspicious clothing. Gu Yiming quickly threw away the hemp clothes as if bitten by a snake, and then shouted for misfortune. He continued to pat his shoulders and back with his hands, jumping in place. The woman in green was actually amused. This foolish scholar, so cute, couldn't bear to continue playing the trick. Chapter 6. Corpse Removal. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. Watching this foolish scholar accidentally step on something while jumping, he slipped and fell to the side, just lying on the thin-skin coffin. The coffin board was very thin and had some cracks. Gu Yiming knocked out a nosebleed, and to his surprise, a drop of nosebleed dripped into the gap of the coffin cover. At the moment when the drop of blood dripped in, the woman in blue frowned slightly imperceptibly, and then deliberately lifted her foot to kick the scholar's ankle, which was constantly retreating while covering her nose. The force was not too great, and she happened to kick the scholar down from behind. Gu Yiming turned around in the air and once again lay on the woman in blue. When he saw clearly that his hands were in a sensitive position on the woman's body, the foolish scholar was shocked. He jumped up in place again as if bitten by a snake, retreated repeatedly, and his face turned red. The woman in green deliberately teased, "Oh my, I thought the young master was a righteous gentleman, but he ended up taking advantage of me one after another. No, no, no. Gu Yiming shook his hands randomly and quickly defended himself. Miss, I misunderstood. I didn't mean to do it earlier. However, looking back on what had happened earlier, it seemed that he didn't know where to start. Because Gu Yiming turned his back to the coffin and did not see a thin, dark figure, he was gently pushing open the coffin cover and slowly sitting up. Under the dim moonlight, it turned out to be a corpse. The corpse slowly extended its hands, with withered palms and sharp and slender nails, grabbing the back of the scholar's neck. The scholar's face was flushed with language, and he danced and danced without noticing. As her fingertips were about to touch the scholar's flesh, the woman in blue reached out and grabbed the scholar's sleeve, then pulled into her own arms. The scholar was waving his hands wildly, unprepared, and was pulled down again. He threw himself into the arms of the woman in green, and his hands happened to be pressed against her chest. This action also happened to avoid being caught by the corpse. The scholar was stunned, his originally flushed face turning inch by inch from his neck to a redder pig liver color, almost dripping with blood, and he began to struggle backwards. The woman in green knew that the scholar's nosebleeds had just flowed out, indicating a leakage of yang, causing the corpse demons in the yard to become corpses. She didn't want the scholar to witness all of this, so she firmly pressed the scholar's face against her chest, rolled and dodged the claws of the dried corpse once again. The woman in green hugged several scholars and rolled towards the entrance of the main hall of the mountain god temple. Suddenly, she saw several other corners of the front hall, and it seemed that some coffins had their lids removed. A few more dry corpses sat up, and in the hollow sockets of her eyes, there seemed to be a faint green light flashing, expressing her desire for flesh and blood. The woman in green had a solemn expression, controlling the scholar so that he couldn't look up. She looked around at the group of dry corpses that were beginning to gather corpses. First, she gave a cold smile, and then suddenly her pink pretty face turned into a strange blue, with a dazzling yellow-green light flashing in her eyes. The corpses around saw the woman's eyes emitting a fierce light, and their movements slowed down. They then bent slightly and slowly retreated back to their respective coffins. Only the corpses that had just come into contact with a drop of blood from the scholar seemed hesitant, but still managed to retreat into the coffin and lay still. The woman in blue suddenly felt a heat in her chest, looked down, and found that the scholar's face was covered in nosebleeds rubbing against her chest. The scholar was speechless, so she quickly let go and pushed him away. Gu Yiming has been working in a pharmacy since he was young. Where did he come into contact with such a vibrant and fragrant atmosphere? At this moment, nosebleeds are flowing like a flood of floodgates. It is unknown whether it was caused by the collision just now. Gu Yiming covered his nose and initially wanted to explain, but looking at his current disheveled state, he noticed that the woman in blue was disheveled and had nosebleeds on her chest. Suddenly, he felt that no matter how he explained it, it was useless. If he was treated as a pervert, he should be treated as a pervert. At this moment, the expression on the face of the woman in green had already returned to normal, but the scholar found that the woman in green did not scold her for being a pervert, but rather arranged her clothes with a complex expression on her own. Zayashun. Calm, what's going on? The scholar felt a little anxious in his heart, and the two of them sat at the entrance of the main hall. For a moment, the atmosphere was ambiguous and they fell silent. After holding it for a while, the scholar finally managed to hold back a sentence from his heart. I will be responsible to you. Upon hearing these words, the woman in green froze for a moment, then burst out laughing with a thud. She was exceptionally charming and stunned the scholar. The woman in green smiled for a while, then suddenly stood up and turned her back to the scholar. Her long hair was flowing, and she suddenly said something without a thought. I'm in a good mood today. Then she walked lightly towards the main entrance. Hey, girl, it's dangerous outside. Where are you going? The scholar chased after her with his nose covered, but it seemed that the woman in green was as weightless and fast as ever. The messy wooden boards at the main entrance didn't stop her, as if she suddenly squeezed out through the crack in the door. The scholar chased after the door and was also taken aback. How did this girl get out? Are you walking so fast? Ignoring nosebleeds, he began to open the door barrier at the entrance while shouting, "Miss, don't leave. My name is Gu Yiming, from Panghe County. I haven't asked for your name yet." Gu Yiming still held back a word in his heart, not knowing why the girl's name would come to propose marriage in the future. He and her skin were on a blind date, and he touched everything he shouldn't have touched. He couldn't ruin the reputation of the girl's family. Ah bah, Gu Yiming suddenly slapped himself in the face. What shouldn't be touched? Is there anything else on the girl's body that should be touched? As I was unpacking the door panel, I suddenly heard the faint voice of a woman in green outside the door coming from afar. The danger is not outside, you should leave quickly too. When the scholar finished dismantling the door panel and ran out, there was nowhere else to see the figure of the woman in green. Chapter 7. Going Back and Back. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. Gu Yiming scratched his head and looked anxious, but he didn't dare to chase after her. He didn't know from which direction the woman in green had left, and he didn't even wear any clothes. He had to return to the front hall in frustration. The other girl may have a thin skin. After dawn, if you go to the nearby neighborhood to inquire, you should also be able to find out who the girl is from. After thinking it through, Gu Yiming started stacking the door panels at the door again, recalling the beautiful scene just now. Not good, I feel like nosebleeds are coming out again. At this moment, the corpse, which had been activated by the scholar's blood, stopped in the corner and sat up again, greedily looking at the scholar's back. The scholar tidied up the front door, and the dried corpse had already walked out of the coffin and walked unsteadily to the back of the scholar. After being nourished by the scholar's drop of blood, the movement of the dried corpse this time was noticeably faster than before. The corpse once again extended its sharp claws and aimed at the scholar's neck. Just as it was about to be fiercely grabbed, the scholar happened to use the axe he had found before to forcefully nail the door panel. The nail was found on other wooden boards, and the back of the axe could just serve as a hammer. When struck hard, the force accumulated backwards, and the axe blade swung backwards, hitting the center of the corpse's eyebrows. The corpse hissed and took a few steps back, falling into a pile of debris. Scholars don't know that any sharp blade that has killed a life will be contaminated with evil energy, which is something that all kinds of ghosts and monsters fear. Moreover, this axe did indeed kill people in the fire a few hours ago, making it a safe killing blade. The scholar admired the masterpiece in front of him and felt that he could go back to sleep peacefully. He picked up his axe and walked back, suddenly turning back to the angle of the main hall. He didn't see the slightly trembling corpse lying among the debris. Gu Yiming returned to the main hall. As soon as he closed the door, he felt like he had kicked something. There seemed to be something on the ground, so he lowered his head and picked it up. At first glance, it seemed to be a wooden hairpin. Hey! A wooden hairpin. Isn't it the girl in green who fell just now? The scholar was both surprised and delighted, and leaned the wooden hairpin towards the newly concealed door frame. Through the faint moonlight outside the door frame, he wanted to take a closer look. And at this moment, there was also a pair of hollow eye sockets outside the door panel, looking inside against the crack of the door. It was the corpse who stood up again and arrived at the entrance of the main hall. But the scholar found that the light was blocked and changed the crack in the door. As a result, the light was blocked again. Little did he know that it was the yang energy exhaled from his own mouth, which caused the dry corpse outside the door and himself to always block the same crack in the door. The scholar also noticed that something seemed to be blocking him outside the door, pulling open the door bolt and wanting to push, while the corpse had no intelligence. It leaned against the door and pushed inside, but with both sides exerting force at the same time, it failed to open the door. Gu Yiming was puzzled and was about to increase his strength and push a few more times when he suddenly heard the screams of a woman outside the front hall from afar, as if it was the voice of the woman in green. "It's broken. I must have encountered that group of criminals again. They had already said it was dangerous outside." The scholar suddenly became very anxious, picked up the axe, and a force surged out of nowhere. He slammed into the door frame with all his might, breaking the door shaft and causing a large pile of door beams and wooden boards above it to collapse. Gu Yiming didn't care much about it. Before it completely collapsed, he saw a gap and crawled out. Little did he know that the dried corpse pressed under the door panel was about to get up when it was pushed back by one end of the door beam and a pile of broken tiles and debris, unable to move. When Gu Yiming rushed to the door, he began to dismantle the front hall door again. The front hall door has been dismantled and blocked today, and it has been dismantled and blocked again. The scholar is now on par with the door panel. The scholar had just opened a small part when he heard the screams of a woman in the distance getting closer and closer. Through the opening gap, he could see the woman in green, disheveled and running towards him like the wind. He was immediately anxious and ready to pick up an axe to split the remaining pieces. When he brought the woman in, his clothes suddenly flipped over in front of him. The woman in green had already stood beside him and anxiously pulled the scholar to run into the main hall without hesitation. Zhaozhuyuan.com, "Hey, girl." The scholar followed and turned to look at the door. The gap he had opened could only protrude half of his body. How could this girl come in? This girl is so skilled, isn't she skilled in martial arts? The foolish scholar did not consider any other possibilities at all. When they arrived at the entrance of the main hall, they were both surprised, but their gaze was fixed in different positions. The scholar's gaze remained fixed on the collapse of the door, which became even more severe. It was difficult for even one person to find a gap and squeeze in for a moment. The woman in blue remained focused on the figure wriggling faintly under the collapsed door panel. "Miss, first. Hey." The scholar turned around and was about to say to let the woman go first. Suddenly, he realized that the woman had disappeared, and then turned around to find that she had entered the door at some point. "Oh what, come in quickly." The woman looked anxious and reached out to pull the scholar. Suddenly, her face was full of fear and she withdrew her hand, and her whole body suddenly disappeared. "Girl, girl." The scholar was still hesitating whether to insert his head or his leg first. He was trying to use one leg to try and borrow force when he realized that the woman was missing. "Isn't it because I was injured and fainted?" The scholar became worried. After all, he looked really disheveled when he escaped just now, and I don't know if he was injured. So Gu Yiming retracted his leg and wanted to probe inside first. When retracting his leg, he accidentally scratched his calf from the broken wood stubble, and several drops of fresh blood immediately fell on the door panel pressed under the group. Several layers of yellow paper were pasted on the door panel, which was already in ruins. Blood flowed down the paper in an instant and entered the mouth of the struggling corpse. Fresh blood entered the throat, and the withered body of the corpse began to tremble slightly. The withered and lifeless face instantly showed some signs of vitality. Chapter 8. Surviving Bates. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push. The scholar didn't bother to bandage his legs and shouted, "Girl, where are you?" He hesitated as he explored and tried to get in. And at the broken window paper on the doorframe under my feet, a withered palm had already grabbed it up along the gap, explored left and right, and finally touched the scholar's shoe as my fingertips turned. At this moment, a loud shout suddenly came from outside the entrance of the mountain god temple. "Evil, come out and suffer death." The loud shout startled Gu Yiming. The sound was a bit familiar, by the way, it was the giant man he met on the way. It seems that the woman in green just now was evading his pursuit. Well, he is indeed part of that gang of bandits who joined forces. The scholar felt a little timid when he thought of the tall and mighty man with a broad sword hanging from his waist, but he still bravely carried his axe and trembled as he walked out. They were still 5 or 6 steps away from the door, but suddenly the door was torn apart, and fragments of the door panels flew wildly, causing the scholar to take 2 steps back and almost fall. Then a tall man rushed in from the door, and it was indeed Fu Donglai. The strong man had always been worried about an ambush inside the house, otherwise the witch wouldn't have escaped back here in the end. As soon as he rushed into the front hall, he saw a figure in the corner of his eye and sneered slightly. He lifted his robe, shook his wrist, and a dark giant sword slightly swung back and forth, chopping towards that figure. Hey! Hey! Gu Yiming stumbled back and just stood firm when he saw someone waving something towards his neck. In a hurry, he forgot to call for help and only had time to make 2 meaningless sounds. Upon hearing someone's voice, the giant man was startled, but his weapon was so powerful that he didn't have time to stop. He could only slightly increase his force upwards, allowing the giant sword to slash diagonally against the scholar's scalp and hit the decaying wooden pillar in the front hall porch. This blow was so powerful that it even cut off the porch pillar, causing half of the front door hall to collapse. Just now, that sword made the scholar walk in front of the gate of ghosts, and his hair bun was also split. The scholar's face was as earthy as earth, and he was frightened to the sky. The broken tiles in the front hall fell on him, and he didn't know how to hide. He was in a frightened state. The dust settled, and the giant Han saw the scholar's face clearly. He immediately smiled awkwardly and said, "Why haven't you died yet?" This opening made the scholar tremble and come to his senses. With a strange cry, he lifted the axe to protect his chest and shouted loudly, "You are indeed a fierce thief, but it's not easy to kill me." So the scholar gritted his teeth, closed his eyes, and swung his axe to chop it up. Fu Donglai took 2 steps back to avoid the attack and saw the scholar wielding an axe with his eyes closed, waving wildly in the air. Seeing this foolish scholar with no strength in his hands but a desperate expression, Fu Donglai felt a bit amused. The scholar had never eaten anything for 2 days, and after waving it for only a dozen times, he was already exhausted. Fu Donglai saw that his axe was crooked, and his brow furrowed. He reached out to grab it and threw it aside. Gu Yiming had a momentary lack of breath, feeling that the sky and earth were spinning around, his legs were unstable, he fell to the ground, and he couldn't stop panting. Fu Donglai was too lazy to talk to the scholar anymore, looking around with a solemn expression. The surrounding area of this mountain temple is clearly a more sophisticated formation, which suppresses divine thoughts. I just followed a scholar outside the mountain temple, but soon entered a fantasy formation similar to a ghost hitting a wall. For a long time, I couldn't find a way out, so I had to protect my mind and calm it down. It wasn't until recently that a strange woman in green swept past the formation, and Fu Donglai found the right direction to break through the formation. He escaped and injured the woman in green with the diamond handprint. The woman in green was spinning around, fighting and fleeing. Seeing it difficult to escape, she unexpectedly returned to the mountain temple. Fu Donglai chased after him relentlessly, but his heart was also uneasy. With such a clever illusion formation, he was afraid that the demons in this place were not ordinary. If he had grown up, he might have even set himself up, which led to the scene just now. Gu Yiming saw the giant man holding a huge sword and looking towards the main hall. He remembered that the woman in green was still hiding in the hall. He had the courage to climb and rush to the entrance of the main hall, blocking the only relatively large entrance with his back and shouting loudly. "You thief, I met you on the night road just now. I saw that you were polite and mistakenly thought you were a good person. Unexpectedly, you are also a person with a human face and animal heart, a greedy and lascivious person." When Fu Dongliden heard the scholar scolding him for being greedy for flowers and lustful, he knew in his heart that he was being treated as a mountain bandit. "I have long heard of demons and demons luring around here, often seducing passing men at night and killing them. Fu Donglai let go of his original plan and wandered around the area for a few days. On the way, he also met several groups of bandits with a bad expression. When he met the scholar, he saw blood stains on his body and evil energy, thinking that he was a bandit. Although he appeared polite on the surface, he did have the idea of using the scholar to lure those demons out. At that time, Fu Donglai casually patted the scholar's shoulders, not just an ordinary slap, but by pinching the Shura seal in advance. These two slaps extinguished the yang fire on the scholar's shoulders. The body of an ordinary person is constantly steaming and circulating with yang energy. There are 3 nodes where yang energy converges on the shoulders of the head. In the eyes of those who understand Yin techniques, these 3 points are like 3 flames, also known as the outer 3 yang. In the human body, there are 7 cyclic nodes arranged vertically along the midline of the body, from the throat to the perineum. These 7 nodes undergo continuous yin-yang conversion over time, known as the 7 passes. The commonly referred to clenching teeth actually refers to the first level of the throat. When most of the 7 levels are yang, it is called the internal 7 yang. However, when a person's body is weak, their qi and blood are not smooth, and they rest at night, most of the 7 levels are yin. They can refer to it as the internal 7 yin through the book Garden www.zhaozuiyuan.com. If an adult man travels at night and his body is dominated by the 7 levels of yin, and the yang fire on his head and shoulders is extinguished, his body will approach a state between yin and yang. Yang fire can make evil spirits feel burned, and this constitution that connects yin and yang will make evil spirits like to approach the human body, making it easier for the human body to provoke evil spirits. Fu Donglai's cultivation is mainly based on martial arts, and his body has extremely strong yang fire. He is afraid of avoiding any evil spirits. He used to wander in this area and could not encounter any evil spirits. Therefore, he developed the idea of using scholars as bait to catch and eliminate those evil spirits. I had originally thought that I would follow behind, so as not to let this foolish scholar die. However, I didn't expect that there was a powerful magic formation in this mountain temple that had not been activated. After a series of twists and turns, I saw blood stains on the chest of the woman in blue. I thought the scholar had died, but I felt quite guilty. However, when I entered the door, I saw that the scholar was not only alive, but also had a strong yang fire on his head. It seems that the scholar did not lose his mind and vent his yuan-yang by the demons, and the demons did not take his life. Fu Donglai couldn't help but look up at the scholar a bit, thinking to himself, perhaps he is really a righteous gentleman who can resist the temptation of the demons and is not in the same group as the treacherous and cunning people he saw on the road. Where did the faint evil energy and resentment on his body come from? At first, because of this hint of resentment, I thought this scholar was just good at disguise. Therefore, although I used the scholar, if he really had any misfortune, I wouldn't be very concerned about it. This kind of evil energy and resentment is not the same as the aura of ordinary demons, but more like being cursed by someone. It is not found in people who have not done anything wrong. He didn't know that the resentment and evil energy entwined around the scholar's body was due to stealing the offerings from the grave. Chapter 9. Ancient Sword Kills Corpse. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, the scholar saw himself shouting and yelling, as if he had really frightened the giant man in front of him. Fu Donglai's expression slightly calmed down, and he leaned over the scholar to sniff with his big nose, frowning. The scholar dodged the huge man's beard while shouting, "What are you doing? You villain, bullying women is not enough. Do you still plan to bully men?" As soon as Gu Yiming uttered these words, his heart suddenly thumped, muttering to himself that it was not good. When he worked in a pharmacy, he often heard old pharmacists talk about some legends of good men among the upper class and powerful. He wouldn't have come across them today, would he? Fu Donglai didn't have a good temper, snorted coldly and ignored Gu Yiming, continuing to sniff around. What do you smell? Get out of here, what kind of behavior is that? The scholar became anxious and reached out to pull the giant man's beard. Do you know anything? There's something unclean here, and it seems like there's more than one. Fu Donglai lost his temper, feeling a bit puzzled. His 5 senses were constantly suppressed, making him very uneasy, with a feeling of being surrounded by wolves. Suddenly, Fu Donglai saw something unusual on the underground door panel, and his eyes became cold and sharp. He shouted, "Where are you running?" Then he swung his giant sword and plunged straight down. At first, the scholar felt that the giant man seemed to have become somewhat reasonable, but why did he suddenly take action again? I can only shout, a big man, my eyes tightly closed, waiting to die. Who knew that after feeling a cool breeze in front of him, the giant sword seemed to penetrate the door panel under his feet, and then a hissing sound came, followed by a foul odor rising from his feet. Ah, this. The scholar suddenly realized that this sword was not meant to stab him, and then he was pulled aside by the giant man, staring blankly at everything in front of him. I saw a giant sword slightly wider than the palm of my hand piercing directly through the door panel, and something seemed to be burnt under the door panel, with a stream of green smoke scattered everywhere. After a moment, the green smoke dissipated, and the giant man kicked open the door panel, covering it with his foot. Below, he saw a seemingly burned corpse curled up, with a giant sword inserted into his chest. You. Why are you like this? The dead are too big. Why do you destroy human remains? The scholar was shocked. He felt that the giant man was bold. Stealing a manta by himself was enough to be afraid. How dare anyone insult the corpse like this? But why did he burn the body without lighting an open flame? I saw the giant man sneer and turn around, staring at the scholar for a moment, which scared him back a step. You have this compassion, why don't you think about why this corpse doesn't just stay in the coffin, but appears at the entrance of the main hall? That's not enough to destroy the body. What should we do if we go back to the family to find it? The scholar paused for a moment, feeling that the body was not strange. After all, a few dilapidated coffins were indeed found in the yard just now. As for how to get to the door and find them under the door panel, he still didn't understand for a moment. He didn't understand, but Fu Donglai understood that if a corpse had undergone a transformation, it would search and devour the flesh and blood of living people at night. Just now, he smelled a strange aura of Yin and corpse, and I'm afraid this foolish scholar had unconsciously had close contact with this corpse. But besides looking a bit embarrassed and having some flesh and skin injuries on his body, this scholar is living well. I don't know if it's lucky or unlucky. The giant Han snorted coldly and picked up the hand of the corpse with his sword tip to show to the scholar, saying, "Did you see these sharp nails? Where are these ordinary corpses? The black and green ones on them are venom, and a little bit of it will make it difficult to survive." The scholar leaned up and glanced at it, causing his scalp to tingle. He forced his words and said, "I don't understand these things, so don't scare me." Gu Yiming was half convinced and half skeptical, only taking care of medicinal herbs in the pharmacy. Although there were also doctors in the pharmacy who often talked about the tragic situation of some people who died of illness, they had never mentioned anything like knives in their fingernails. Believe it or not, it's up to you. The giant Han was originally a bit sorry for this foolish scholar, but now he couldn't help but feel a bit annoyed by this person's pedantry. He used his sword to pull the remaining wreckage to the corner of the front hall. This corpse should have been raised. You stayed overnight here and he had to eat you alive. You should be grateful that I saved you. Nonsense, I've been here for a while and I've never seen any corpses come up. The scholar argued, and besides, you saved me. The scholar pointed to his messy bun and said, "Are you saving me? How do I feel like you're trying to kill me? Don't you believe me?" The big man blew his beard and glared. His first sword was indeed a misunderstanding, but his second sword actually saved this stinky kid. "The words of the wicked are never believed," the scholar exclaimed. I'm not a villain, Fu Donglai explained, and as soon as he spoke, he regretted talking to the scholar about something. Evil people all say that, and besides. You used your sword and knife as soon as you came up, it's so unreasonable. You almost hurt someone, you're just a strange person. The scholar continued to tease his neck. I'm a strange person. Didn't you see anything strange or anyone strange when you came to this dilapidated temple? The giant man patiently said, the green-clad female demon did indeed come to the entrance of the temple just now, but he did not see that female demon enter the temple. Where is there anything strange? The strangest thing I see now is you. The scholar argued, but his heart was a bit empty. He was worried about the trouble this big man had with the woman in green, and hid what had happened to her. This giant Handan didn't want to continue this topic. He was tall and indeed treated like a weirdo everywhere. Zhaozuiyuan.com. Alright, don't come to me for help even if you're eaten alive, said the giant man, waving his giant sword and striking open the entrance, ready to enter on his own. Oh, you can't go in. The scholar quickly rushed forward and tugged at the giant man's sleeve. Don't bother me, I'm a strange person. The giant man turned around and glared fiercely at the scholar, then squeezed his huge body into the main hall. He kept sniffing around with his nose and muttered to himself, strange, why is there still a demonic aura? Seeing that he couldn't hold on to the giant man, the scholar had no choice but to follow him into the main hall through the split cracks, fearing that the giant man might discover the woman in green hidden inside. Although it seemed that the behavior of the giant Han in front of him did not resemble that of a great evil person, after all, in the middle of the night, this strange person picked himself up halfway, followed him, and even used a big sword to chop this and that in front of him. It was completely different from a normal person, how could it be reassuring? After Gu Yiming entered the hall, he quickly looked around and found that there was no change from before he went out. The two tattered cattails he had just lay on were still in the corner, and within his sight, there was no trace of the woman in green. Just now there was so much commotion in the front hall that I had been worried that the woman in green would rush out. If this giant man really came after the woman in green, wouldn't it be dangerous? The result seemed normal, perhaps the woman had hidden in an extremely hidden place. The scholar breathed a sigh of relief and secretly glanced at the bearded man, feeling that he might not be a bad person, but he might not necessarily be a good person. Fu Donglai continued to sniff around with his big nose. When his senses were suppressed, he spent some more time wandering around the 3 damaged statues and the altar. He didn't find any abnormalities, but instead found several weapons with bloodstains. Chapter 10. Someone has been here. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Ads by Google equals window. Ads by Google. Push, the giant Han threw the 2 machetes he found in front of the scholar, who was also startled. You said you haven't seen any strange people or things, how do you explain this? How did I know? It's dark here, how did you find it? The scholar breathed a sigh of relief, frowned, and touched the back of his head. Fu Donglai naturally didn't bother to explain. Although his 5 senses were suppressed, he was still much more sensitive than ordinary people. He could see things in the dark, but because the formation was blocked, he couldn't smoothly open the heavenly eye to explore the strangeness in the main hall. The heavenly eye, also known as the yin and yang eye, is a divine ability called panghui by Daomen. It is a technique that can mobilize the true energy of the whole body, and with the help of the area 1 inch above the eyebrow center, it can sense the yin and yang energy of the surrounding things, in order to discover some yin things that are difficult to detect with the naked eye. The heavenly eye is also divided into 2 types based on innate or acquired abilities. The innate heavenly eye is born with great opportunities, while the acquired heavenly eye is obtained through hard cultivation, with weaker effects than the innate heavenly eye. Moreover, it heavily depends on the practitioner's own cultivation level. People with high cultivation levels can even train the acquired heavenly eye to a level very close to the innate heavenly eye. Another very important point is that when the Haoxiantian eye is activated for energy transfer, it consumes a lot of mental energy. When Giant Han tried to find the exit of the illusion formation outside the mountain god temple, he had already used it for a long time. His spiritual energy was consumed greatly, and the suppression power of the formation in the main hall was even heavier, making it impossible to open the heavenly eye again. Fu Donglai thought to himself that his cultivation was still not enough. If it were his senior brother here, with the help of the purple chi shield, even with this formation to suppress him, he should be able to smoothly open the heavenly eye and find the formation eyes inside and outside the temple. It should not be difficult. The scholar pinched a machete with 2 fingers and found that there seemed to be blood stains on the edge. He rubbed his hand against it and found it slightly sticky. It was indeed a sharp blade that had recently injured people. Scared. The scholar quickly threw the knife onto the altar, grabbed the tattered prayer banner next to him, wiped his hand on it for a while, and suddenly remembered that there seemed to be an unlit oil lamp before, so he began to reach out and explore. "Hey, do you have a fire hammer or a flint fire sickle? There's an oil lamp here. I advise you to give up this idea," the giant snorted coldly without looking back. "Why not? This lamp has oil and a wick. It's so black, how convenient is it to have a lamp? That lamp is mixed with the corpse oil of the underworld." The scholar didn't hear clearly, but the last few words, human corpse oil, were heard clearly, and he immediately jumped back in fear. "Oh, corpse oil. No way, didn't you intentionally scare people?" The scholar couldn't help but approach the giant man a bit, with a tremolo in his voice. This type of lamp made of corpse oil is very suitable for adding some special drugs to create a trigger, which can make people enter hallucinations and make the giant man ponder. If everything goes well, this should be the first scene where a ray illusion, medicine, and female demon's soul capturing technique kill numerous passers-by. Most of the time, people and ghosts have different paths, and the yang energy on a person's body is the best treasure for warding off evil, especially the blood in the areas with the strongest qi and blood on the body, and even some necessary materials for casting spells. However, in special circumstances where the body's yang energy is not strong, the mind is unclear, and the soul is restless, it is easy to be taken advantage of by evil forces. Looking at the current layout, it is precisely from the 5-mile range outside the mountain god temple that people start to enter. These bloody blades should have been left by the previous group of victims. Generally, this type of weapon with blood, especially the killing blade that has killed people, has the effect of warding off evil, and depending on the situation, including the previous acts, 7 people were killed at the same time. The yang energy on the 7 people merged like a raging flame, so those evil spirits must have used some method to make these people voluntarily lay down their weapons in order to seduce them in close proximity and release their yuan yang, which ultimately harmed their lives. Fu Donglai speculated that there might be aphrodisiac drugs in the oil lamp, and he always felt that there was something hidden in this main hall. Although he did not witness the Qingyi woman entering the mountain temple, it was obvious that this mountain temple was a hideout of dirt and filth. So where did the Qingyi woman go? Fu Donglai looked at the 7 sharp blades and took out a small, flat wooden box and a small treasure bag from his arms. At first, the scholar thought it was food, but when he saw these things, he vented his energy and sat down on the old and dilapidated futon next to him. However, he was still worried about where the woman in green had gone. Fu Donglai glanced at the scholar but remained silent. He picked up the scattered weapons on the ground, then looked at the sky and estimated the time. He began to look in the front hall of the mountain god temple, the back hall, and the eaves of the main hall, hanging those weapons, with a talisman attached to each weapon. After hanging 7 weapons, the giant man squeezed out gray powder from the wooden box and sprinkled it along a strange path on the ground. "What are you doing?" Gu Yiming was curious and wanted to take a closer look, but was blocked by the giant man's big hand, which was like a fan. Zhaoshuyuan.com, put away your curiosity. The giant Han was a bit impatient, but he patiently explained that he needed to use the scholar for the next operation. This is the simplified 7 evil nail soul formation. Wait until you sit where I asked you to sit, don't move. After speaking, the giant Han continued to bury his head and sprinkle incense ash, and placed the scholar's cattail in a dusty position on the inner side. The scholar was somewhat unhappy, but afraid of the giant Han's strength, he had to sit on the cattail, wrapped in his tattered clothes that were 80 or 90% wet, trembling as he sat down. Ju Han checked again and found no problem. He sat cross-legged in the opposite position of the scholar in the main hall, and also took a gourd from his waist. As soon as he opened the stopper, a smell of wine emanated. The scholar was shivering with cold, smelling the fragrance and looking at the giant man, but feeling a bit embarrassed to speak. The giant man seemed to have eyes growing behind his back. After taking a few sips, he closed the bottle and threw the gourd to the scholar. You can only take 1 sip, don't drink too much. The scholar expressed his gratitude, opened the gourd stopper, and sniffed it with his nose. It felt spicy and pungent, as if there was a hint of other flavors, including the scent of realgar and sanyang grass. Oh, sanyang wine. The scholar was working in a pharmacy and could distinguish the properties of the medicine. However, the giant man was slightly surprised and looked over. This sanyang wine not only satisfies the appetite, but also has the effect of using the power of wine to stimulate the production of yang energy. Originally, Giant Han saw 2 people occupying the positions of the 2 ceremonial vessels in the mountain temple, and needed yang fire as the formation eye. However, the scholar's yang energy was too weak, and he needed the assistance of sanyang wine. Unexpectedly, the scholar recognized sanyang wine. The scholar tilted his neck and took a big sip, stuffed the stopper and threw it back to the giant Han. The giant Han nodded slightly, put away the gourd, and then closed his eyes to rest his mind, not speaking anymore.